My name's Christy Cork. I am a specialized consultant for healthy workplaces. I feel like I saw some familiar names popping up in the chat, so maybe I've had the pleasure of working with or speaking with some of you in the past. I've got Desiree also sitting in on the session with me, helping me out in the back end, and if we need resources and things like that. So thank you, Dee Dee, for all of your help. Just a quick introduction for myself. So like I mentioned, maybe before some of you joined, I live in St. Thomas, Ontario. So I am joining you from my home office, and other people that are in the London area. I saw a few people chiming in. It is a beautiful sunny day. It was cool this morning, but the sun's out. It's lovely. So again, thanks everyone for taking the time. We've got an hour and a half together to really just talk about workplace violence and harassment prevention. We're going to get into some de-escalation. We're going to talk about sort of what to say, what not to say, what happens when people start escalating, and how to most effectively de-escalate. This session is focused on sort of the retail service sector. Those of you that work, have direct contact with customers, clients, patients, all of those things, really to start formulating, effective response and through that prevention lens as well. So I'm going to go through a few sort of housekeeping slides here. Firstly, we do recommend computer audio. Hopefully everybody can hear me okay. I am kind of a loud talker, so if it feels like I'm yelling at you, you may have to turn your volume down. I'm used to being in front of a group of people, not with a microphone so close to my mouth, so I tend to get excited and a little bit loud sometimes. Your camera is off just because we have such a huge group. We're up to 145. This is exciting. We're going to break some records today, hopefully for safety connections. Yeah, so your camera and your microphone will remain off. You can imagine how distracting it would be if we had tons of background noise and people on camera. It would maybe slow our presentation down a little bit. What you do have access to is some other engagement features, certainly the chat feature, which we've been using already this morning for you to let me know where you're joining from. We also have the reaction, so you can do like, yeah, the thumbs up, the smiley face, you can do a surprised face. There's a few different options there, so feel free to use those reactions at any time. Let me know how things are going for you out in cyberspace. We do have a couple poll questions that will be asked throughout the session today. I promise those are anonymous. It does not say who is responding in what way. So another way to sort of get engaged and let me know, get a bit of a pulse of what's going on. And then of course the chat. And I love using the chat feature. I get distracted a little bit by the chat. So sometimes I will pause and then intentionally go back and look at the chat to answer questions instead of jumping back and forth constantly, because I know that can be very distracting for listeners and participants not knowing what I'm talking about. So I will be intentional about responding to those questions in the chat. And certainly I will try to leave some time at the end to go back, and maybe Dee Dee can help me filter through some of those questions that we haven't touched on. But yeah, some exciting locations. I saw someone from Mount Forest. That's where my sister lives. And I see some from like Western and London, out in Ottawa, Belleville. So again, thank you so much everybody for joining. It's really nice to see that we can do this and get people from all over the province together. We do have some accessibility features. If you would like closed captioning, oh wow, Sandra, welcome from Newfoundland. That's amazing. See, this is what I do. I look at the chat and then I forget what I'm saying. I'm not going to do that anymore, I promise. Our accessibility features, you can do live captions. So if you go to the 3 dots at the top of your screen where it says more actions and you click down on that, you are able to go into language and speech and then turn on the captions if that's something that is helpful for you. You can also view the presentation in full screen mode. So again, if you go up to the view option, it's like a box with 4 quadrants. You can click on that and it will make the presentation larger. I sort of would give you a proceed with caution warning on that. It can be a nice feature if you're struggling to read some of the smaller text on the slides. However, it can limit your ability to sort of see some of the other features in the room. So again, up to you. However, your viewing pleasure, you can always change it if it's not working for you. Our goals with these safety connections, honestly, we want to share information. We want workplaces to be as safe as possible. So delivering these free safety connections across the province really gives us an opportunity to connect with all of you. It allows you to sort of connect with each other, and it's easy for us to get people together virtually in this way. So again, you get to attend from the comfort of whether you're in a home office or in a work environment. And like I mentioned, maybe before some of you joined in, we have so many of these free safety connections available for you to view at your leisure on WSPS.ca. Maybe I'll get Dee Dee or Emily, who's also in the background, to even provide a link in the chat just to where all of these safety connections can be found, because there's some other ones, around opioid harm reduction and that new legislation. There's lots on like machine safety and pedestrian safety. We've done a whole suite of these. So absolutely some fantastic free information for everybody. I'm going to pause now. I see some questions coming up in the chat. So John, yes, you can mute your microphone. Oh, is there a way to remove the notice that, oh, you cannot clear it? Oh, well, I don't know how to do that. Maybe I was
There's an
thinking
X. There's an X at the top, Christy,
okay.
and
Yep.
she just have to click on the X.
Okay, thanks, Dee Dee. I do know sometimes it's very distracting if as people chime in the chat and you hear the ding constantly, so you can mute the chat as well, which sometimes I find helpful just because, again, I get distracted. Okay, yeah, and if you're still struggling, absolutely log back and log back in. We will still be here. Okay, so here we're going to get started with our safety connection. Hopefully, if there's any other sort of logistic issues, Dee Dee, maybe you can chime in via chat just so we can help people get sorted. So on our agenda today, we are going to talk about the current state of workplace violence and harassment in Ontario. And I do recognize now, looking at the chat, that there are people joining from outside of Ontario. I'm pretty sure, I can't say I guarantee it, but I'm quite confident that some of the trends that we're seeing in workplace violence and harassment in Ontario would also, translate to other sort of regional jurisdictions. So whether it is Pennsylvania, Sarah, or out in Newfoundland or out in the Maritimes, or if we've got some people joining from out west, I'm sure it is a lot of the same factors that are going on. We're going to look at sort of what are some of the contributing factors that we've seen recently. Why are things maybe on the rise, or we're experiencing things a little bit differently than we did pre-COVID. We're going to go through the escalation continuum and sort of understand what happens when people start to escalate in their behaviors, what they say, and what appropriate staff responses should be, how to de-escalate effectively. We're going to look at what's part of a workplace violence and harassment program, making sure that we really do focus on through that prevention lens. We don't want to wait and have these particular hazards in the workplace that are going uncontrolled. If we can control them through programs, through policies, through that hazard identification and risk assessment lens, then that's what we want to be doing. We're going to talk a little bit about psychological health and safety. Psychological health and safety is what I am most passionate about. It's near and dear to my heart. I actually think that a lot of issues and things going on in workplaces can be minimized or prevented if we look at these situations through a psychological health and safety lens. So we're going to touch on that. We're going to say, how do we create these safe work environments with the intention of minimizing the risk of workplace violence and harassment and setting employees up for success where they have the tools that they need in a safe and supportive environment. And then lastly, hopefully, if I don't, talk too much, we will have time for some Q&A. And if not, you can reach out to me or Dee Dee anytime, right? We'll provide some contact information. Just again, I know a lot of people are asking about the presentations. It will be available. It is being recorded. I just want to make sure that we're expectation setting here. It won't be available like tomorrow. So it does take us a bit of time to get it edited and get it posted on our external website. But yes, this presentation, like all of our other safety connections, will be available to you through WSPS.ca, and you go to sort of that training and events, and then you click on the safety connections, and you'll be able to access it that way. There, thank you. Emily's got it up where you can find our pre-recorded connections. And I strongly suggest that you do take a look at those. There's some really, really good content in there. You will also be getting a follow-up email. So anyone that registered for this course will get an email sent by Emily with some of our resources that we mentioned throughout the session, including that link to the safety connections, I'm sure, and some other resources that we talk about. Again, all free. We're not going to put resources up that are going to cost you a ton of money. We've got tons of free stuff. Okay, perfect. There we go. We got the housekeeping stuff out of the way. So we're going to get started with a poll question. So Emily's going to pop this one up for us. And the first poll question is, do you think uncivil and disrespectful behaviors are becoming more prevalent in Ontario workplaces? And you can answer yes, no, or maybe you're unsure. Again, no right or wrong, maybe just what you're experiencing in your unique work environment and what's going on. But chime in with that poll question there, and we'll take a look at the results. And I have to say, like, we're up to 172 participants, so this is amazing. I actually think, just reflecting on that number of having 172 people participating in this session right now does indicate that this is a topic that is important and for many workplaces and maybe seeing some harms to employees because of workplace violence and harassment. Okay, so I see we have 109 responses at the moment, and 77% of you are saying yes, these disrespectful, uncivil behaviors are becoming more prevalent. 16 are unsure, and only 6 people are saying no. So I'm going to say, we can confidently say the vast majority of those joining on this call are seeing this increase. So let's dive into that. I saw someone here was from Western University, so shout out to a survey that was done, a bit of a study that was done by Western University, the University of Toronto, in conjunction with the Canadian Labour Congress. And what that research found was that over 70% of nearly the 5,000 respondents that participated had experienced at least one incident of workplace violence and harassment in the past 2 years. Let's talk about that for a second. So this was completed in 2022. So that means that over the past 2 years, so essentially 2020 to 2022, 70% of these respondents indicated that they had experienced an incident of workplace violence and harassment. When I read that and when I read this study, it was absolutely shocking to me. So I knew there was a problem because I get customers and, we have conversations all the time with different workplaces across Ontario indicating that yes, like people are often on the receiving end of hurtful, harmful, aggressive, abusive, hostile behaviors. But I did not realize that the prevalence was this high. I should mention that this study was done across various sectors. And it was typically third party and coworkers were the most common perpetrators of the workplace violence. So again, keeping that in mind, this is heavy sort of when you think retail service sector, those that serve customers, serve the public, certainly are at an increased risk for these hostile violent behaviors. Now, other studies that I looked at did sort of note that across the board, there's an increase in severity and frequency, as well as an increased fear to report. Now, that's also very concerning. And I think if we look at some of the data and we know that the prevalence is over 50% of these respondents, again, I don't know these unique workplaces, right, and exactly the types of roles, but I promise that we are not completing incident reports and employees are not reporting every single incident of workplace violence and harassment. There's so many reasons um, why people might not be recording or reporting all of these incidents. Certainly fear of retaliation. Maybe they also think that like nothing's been going to be done about it. So what's the point in reporting? That's quite common as well. And another indicator here is new harasser tactics. So we're looking at things like cyberbullying. We're looking at things like not sort of what we would typically think of as sort of that face-to-face confrontation. Just going to respond to Robert's question here. So third party and coworkers, so other groups can include things like contract workers. We consider third party like the customers, those types of things. You may have visitors. When I think about my time when I worked in healthcare, right, we had the people within the hospital, those would be considered co-workers. Then we also had visitors, we had family, we had our customers and our clients. So there are different groups. We also have to consider another potential perpetrator can be family, or we can look at sort of those domestic violence situations, which could be another group as well, that we know is also covered in the Occupational Health and Safety Act. So there are requirements for workplaces around domestic violence and keeping workers safe. It is, yeah, it's a small minority. It happens, unfortunately. So that would be another sort of group of potential perpetrators. I hope that answers your question, Robert. Okay. So what are some of the leading factors? So, we can come up with this all day, and I'm sure if I asked everyone in the room, sort of what do you think is leading to this sort of situation that we're finding ourselves in the province and in workplaces? Why are people more aggressive, more hostile? Why are we less able to have emotional control, emotional regulation? Why are we always so quick to, you know, be hostile or be aggressive? And there's a lot of reasons. And I've put some up in these thought bubbles here. Um, you know, Increased levels of stress, I see, that comes up in the chat as well. Absolutely. We generally have a lot of stressors that we're living with. And I'm going to summarize the definition of mental health by the World Health Organization for a second. But essentially, the definition is that people are able to cope with the normal stresses of life. And that sounds simple, but what are normal stresses? And I think sometimes, we have all of these different stressors that we're dealing with. Right now, some of the stressors can be financial stress for people. It is very expensive right now to live. It is expensive to put a roof over our house, to fill our car up with gas, to, buy groceries for our family. And so we're living with maybe this increased burden of financial stress. Maybe we have relationship stressors, right, with a spouse or family or significant others. Maybe we have workplace stress, right, which is contributing. We are generally sort of living maybe a little bit higher on that stress continuum. So then when other things happen that we maybe have less capacity to cope effectively with, because we're already sort of at the cusp of our coping skills. So that absolutely, these higher stress levels absolutely plays into that. Some other things that are going on, I put up there the normalization sort of policing others. I think during COVID, this is something that we saw where people, were quick to say or look at their neighbor's house and be like, oh my gosh, there's 4 cars in the driveway, like they're having friends over, they're not flattening the curb, all of those things. And we started sort of policing other people, and we started making it okay. It's like it's always been okay to disagree, and we don't all believe in the same thing. But suddenly it's like this us versus them, me versus them, this polarization. And if people don't believe what I believe, then they're wrong. And we need to sort of fight for people to get on side with us. Like, I think that is sort of changing. I think we've normalized that a little bit. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just looking at the chat for a second. Exposure, instant gratification, absolutely. People fighting for what they want. And if they get told no, then they're not processing that very easily. There's this higher level of alcohol and drug use. That is true. So if people are not effectively coping with their stress and they're resorting to other coping mechanisms like drugs, like recreational or prescription or over-the-counter medication, people are using those as coping strategies because maybe they don't have other means of coping, right? So we have to consider that as well. Absolutely, though, we have seen increases in substance abuse, misuse, and overuse since the start of COVID. Okay, I'm going to keep chugging along here. I want to take a look at this aggression escalation continuum. And what I want everybody to reflect on for a second is when we look at this and we look at these sort of 4 different stages of aggression escalation, What I want you to reflect on is that we all have this. This isn't other people. We all have this aggression escalation, and we all do or say things or act in certain ways as we begin to get frustrated, as we begin to, not cope with or with our stressors, or we start to feel ourselves maybe losing control a little bit. And we have these early warning signs. Everybody does. I want you to think about people that you work closely with or people that you live with. Are you able to identify sort of what their early warning signs are? I know for me, if I'm like in the kitchen, sort of aggressively closing like cupboard doors while I'm making dinner and I'm giving dismissive communication. I'm like, I'm fine. Yep. Okay. Whatever. That's an early warning sign to my husband that like not all is well, right? Like there's stuff going on with me. Those would be my early warning signs. And I can picture my husband's early warning signs too, right? Like he actually sort of does the opposite and gets quieter and maybe doesn't want to communicate, maybe becomes withdrawn. Um, but it's important that we recognize these early warning signs in people so that, again, we're able to effectively de-escalate. We're going to talk about what those look like in a second. I think it's also important that I mention that while this looks nice and tidy and 4 distinct stages, we all know people that go from 0 to 100 in 3.5 seconds. Like we don't all display all of these warning signs every time that we become agitated. Um, that happens, right? So it is important. The most important thing to think about when we look at this continuum is that if we can pick up on these early warning signs, if we can recognize them, if we can de-escalate early before things become hostile, threatening, we're going to be more effective. Okay, so that's the focus with this particular slide, but we're going to get into each of these just a little bit. So early warning signs, what it can look like, things like fidgeting, tapping on a table, pacing, crossed arms, dismissive communication, maybe rude language. We all have early warning signs. I just can't stress that enough. Like, again, we like to think that this happens to other people, but it also happens with us. And it's important when we talk about de-escalation that we also have self-awareness because sometimes while we're attempting to de-escalate someone, we may ourselves start to become triggered based on what they're saying, how they're acting, how they're talking to us. So then we start to maybe communicate less effectively because we're responding and reacting, right, to the situation. So appropriate staff response at this very early warning signs would be things like be a good listener, active listening. We always say maintain a safe distance. I think it's extra critical now. Like I know since COVID that I sort of have a bigger personal space bubble. And if I'm at the grocery store and someone's like right behind me or like I feel like they're up in my space, it's a little bit disconcerting. So maintain that safe distance. If people take a step back while you're talking to them, respect that. That means they want more space. Don't be a close talker, especially when you're trying to de-escalate. It can be perceived as very threatening. Stay calm, seek to understand the problem, right? Don't make assumptions. Really listen to understand. Don't listen to respond. Don't be dismissive. Be empathetic. And certainly in this stage, be proactive. Okay. So when we are de escalating at this very early stage, when I say things like listen, that's an easy word, right? It's really easy to say, oh, yeah, just listen. But there are some qualities and some skills of good listeners that need to be employed if we're going to effectively de escalate. So, if we're listening to someone, we are paying attention to them, we're putting away distractions, we're not formulating a response before someone finishes the, saying what they're looking to say. I also think that, we need to understand our role in a conversation. And sometimes people need support and they just need to get something off of their chest. Sometimes they need solutions. So again, you need to determine if it's a support or solutions conversation, know your role. And there is a difference between listening and hearing, right? Like I'm sure some of you right now, and this is why like virtual sessions are interesting because I'm sure a lot of you right now are busy responding to emails or doing other things, right? And maybe you're playing a game on your phone. I don't know. And I'm not judging because, hey, I've been there, right? Um, you may be hearing what I'm saying, right? You can hear the words are going into your ears, you can hear, but listening involves some sort of active participation, right? Like maybe you're taking notes, maybe you're sort of nodding along, even though I can't hear you. Some of you are chiming in the chat and doing those reaction expressions, which is fantastic, right? Because that makes me feel like you're listening to me. So when you're having a conversation with someone, and it's not so important today, like I get it, we're virtual. I trust that you're there and you're engaged in some way. Um, but when someone is agitated and your role is to listen to them with the intent of de-escalation, with the intent of seeking to understand what's going on with them, you have to give them your attention. You need to put away the distractions. You need to nod. You need to paraphrase. You need to seek clarification and ask questions because that shows that you are invested in that conversation. Okay, it's really, really important. And I should mention, like, as we're talking about this, obviously, this is a workplace conversation and we're talking about de-escalation in the workplace, but these skills absolutely translate to your personal lives. And if you have children, if you're talking to parents, friends, a significant other, all of these tips will work, right? And to try and not get someone sort of continuing to agitate. We don't want to poke the bear. I think sometimes there are people, I know this because I have some in my life, that I think find a little bit of pleasure in getting people riled up, right? And like, when they start to see those early warning signs, they poke and they poke because like for some reason that's maybe entertainment or enjoyment for them. That is not fun. It is not kind. It is not good practice to get people agitated, and especially in the workplace where it is your job to keep people safe, right? Don't poke the bear. Don't ignore those early warning signs. Okay, so we're on to hostile here. And what this can look like is a raised voice. We're going to start to see some of those physiological changes like face reddening, maybe clenched jaw a little bit, maybe some rapid breathing, tone of voice is changing. And our appropriate staff response, again, we're going to maintain a safe distance. I would want to alert another coworker or manager. This isn't like a huge SOS situation if someone's hostile. We don't need to get 50 people there to help support us, but I would let a coworker know that, hey, like I'm just gonna deal with this and maybe have eyes on or be available if I need you. Know your means of egress. Know how you would remove yourself from the situation. Think about, if you're in a room with someone and there's only one exit, make sure that you position yourself so that that person that is becoming hostile or agitated is not between you and your only way to remove yourself from the situation. Allow for silence. I love this. I feel like we are often told that like silence is awkward or those awkward silences. When you are de-escalating someone, silence is golden, right? If they are pausing and they are thinking and processing and trying to understand or formulate a response, that is good. Allow for that silence. Don't feel like you need to keep filling that void with your words, right? Let them pause. Okay, it's really important. Don't rush people. Be patient in your listening, right? Again, I know we don't all have a lot of extra time in our day when we're at work. I know there's a lot going on and a lot of competing priorities, but think about it in the terms that like this is a safety response, right? We are trying to keep people safe. By rushing them, we could cause them to escalate. So give them the time that they need. This last bullet where it says, if appropriate, try to move the agitated individual away to a safe location. This is sort of circumstance specific. I think what you don't want to do is isolate yourself with someone that's agitated, but sometimes people thrive on an audience. And I've seen this at stores like, say Canadian Tire, and people are, trying to deal with a return at customer service and they're creating this scene. Like I think some people thrive on that. So if that's the case, or if there's a lot of stimulus or you can't have a conversation with someone because it's a very noisy environment, then certainly, it might be appropriate to move them somewhere else that's still safe for you, but reduces that noise. I'm going to just chime in here on the chat for a second. Validate feelings is so important. And we're going to talk about that, Melissa, when we have a little slide that says, like, say this, not that. If you say things like calm down or relax, you are immediately telling someone that their response and their reaction to the situation is not valid. And that is going to cause people to continue to escalate, right? We need to validate feelings. We want to seek to understand. We want to say things like, oh, that sounds awful. Or, yes, tell me more about that. Tell me how this is affecting you, right? Those types of questions validate someone's feelings instead of diminish them. As soon as you say to someone, relax or calm down, you are diminishing their experience, okay? I'm looking at Terry's question. Should we respond by staying neutral or agree with the person? That's a great question. I think it depends on the situation and the circumstances. Certainly telling someone that they are wrong isn't going to be helpful in these moments. I think we also need to understand that if someone, I often reflect back on that saying like the customer is always right. That is nonsense. The customer is not always right. Sometimes they are wrong, right? Sometimes maybe they don't understand a policy. Maybe they didn't, get information. By saying the customer is always right means that we now need to bend over backwards and be on the receiving end of an abusive conversation and tolerate and be treated like garbage because we're so worried that maybe we're going to lose business or something like that. I understand that in the spirit of de-escalation, we don't want to be more confrontational. We don't want to tell someone why they're wrong and reinforce, some of that stuff can actually cause people to escalate. But it is not our job to be on the receiving end of violent and abusive and hostile situations. And sometimes the customer is wrong. And sometimes we need to get support, whether it's from a manager or supervisor, to help support us in explaining that. I see people are putting their hands up and I unfortunately cannot take people off mute. So I would suggest using the chat if you have a question. If not, if it's not something that you're comfortable bringing up in the group, then you can email me privately after the session and I'd be happy to help with those questions. But unfortunately, I just can't take people off mute. Okay, Crucial Conversations, absolutely a fantastic book, Patrick. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, common sense. You know what I say sometimes when we use that in health and safety, I'm a health and safety professional, it's like we like to say, oh, it's common sense that people shouldn't put their hand into that machine. Well, you know what? Common sense is not always common. And we need to assume that people will do some wild things, right? That maybe we didn't anticipate. And yeah, you can't force de-escalation. That's true, Brent, right? We want to be there. We want to be a calming presence. Again, seeking to understand and clarify and do what we can, but it certainly does not mean that we need to stand there in the face of abuse and tolerate that. Oh, okay. Thanks, Kate. Um, Okay, so I'm going to continue on here to stage 3, which is threatening behavior. So this is when now, I almost refer to this as like imminent physical aggression. This is, we're seeing clenched fist. We're seeing people red in the face, clenched jaw. Chances are their heart is pounding, right? They're seeing red. They might be yelling, finger pointing. They might be threatening violence. If this happens, if you or people that you work with or that you support find themselves in this situation, you have to assume that that person is going to be physically aggressive. You need to distance yourself if possible. Do not physically engage. Get help. Summon assistance. We know in Ontario, under our workplace violence and harassment legislation, that you have to have means of summoning assistance, and that has to be communicated and shared with staff. So whether that is sort of an SOS button or panic button, an alarm, a phone call, there's lots of different things that you can do. You want to have people in close proximity. And it is important that do not physically engage. It is our recommendation that employees do not initiate contact, physical contact with anybody. That can cause the situation to escalate and it can become very, very dangerous. We're going to get to the final stage of the continuum, which is assaultive. And obviously today we're not getting into like how to physically protect yourself if someone grabs your wrist or does something like that, but you can defend yourself. right, with as much force as necessary to keep you safe. If you have determined through your workplace violence risk assessment that your workplace is at high risk of violence and you have a history of violence and these situations where employees are being physically aggressed upon, you may need to get in touch with a company that does physical intervention training. There are some. Safe Management Group is one that I've worked with in the past, but certainly, seeking out that training to make sure that staff do have the resources and the skills to keep themselves physically safe if that is a high risk. So just as an example, when I worked in healthcare, we had certain units of the hospital that were required to do physical intervention training because, whether it's the emergency department, our mental health inpatient unit, even ICU and our continuing care, even if it's responsive behaviors, the staff needed to have those strategies on how to remove themselves from those situations. Okay. So getting into those program requirements, I just talked about workplace violence risk assessments. It is really important. And I know, yes, it is a legislative requirement in the province of Ontario for workplaces to have conducted a workplace violence risk assessment. If you don't have that, there are tools. We will send out our workplace violence toolkit that has a sample of what that risk assessment can look like. But you do need to assess your workplace, the various roles within your workplace for the risk of violence. And, that's also something that we can help with. But certainly there's lots of free tools available as well. You need to have a workplace violence and harassment policy and program. And again, I'm not getting into all of the specifics here because that's, we don't have time to go into all of the legislation. But essentially for your workplace violence program, you need to, indicate how people summon assistance, have that risk assessment. The workplace violence risk assessment does need to be reviewed by your Joint Health and Safety Committee. Your policies do need to be posted in a location where all employees have access to them. You need to indicate how employees are going to summon assistance, how employees are being trained on the contents of the program. Then for reporting and investigating specifically, that does, is related to your workplace violence program, but also harassment, how people are supposed to report incidents of harassment. And there has to be an option, of course, to report to someone other than your direct supervisor in the event that they are the alleged harasser, and how those incidents are going to be investigated. Also worth noting that it is legislatively required that the person bringing forth the complaint, the complainant in a harassment investigation, does need to be notified of the outcome of the investigation and any corrective action. So that's something that you have to make sure is in your program as well. Okay, a little bit of say this, not that exercise. So I want everybody to start thinking about some of those common terms that we often say, things like relax or calm down, or you
Christy, we lost. I think you already know that you lost volume.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can now.
a notification that my microphone had stopped working, but can someone thumbs up if you can hear me now?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ah, love it. Love all the thumbs. Okay, so I was saying we need to sort of
What is commonly said in an attempt to de-escalate and what we should be saying instead. If we are approaching our de-escalation through this mentality and this lens that we want to keep people from escalating, we want to keep them calm, we want to protect the safety of everyone. I'll share a little bit. When I was growing up, I played a lot of sort of competitive sports. I'm a competitive person by nature. That's sort of just who I am. And my mom used to say to me, Christy, you can be right or you can be happy. And I know doesn't translate exactly into this presentation, but now I feel like when it comes to de-escalation, it's like you can be right or you can be safe. And if we're always trying to tell people why what they're saying or doing is wrong, right, and how they need to do things differently, or they can't do this or they can't do that, and we're trying to educate them, then it causes people to escalate, right? That is not the safe approach. So instead of saying things like relax or calm down, you could say things like, what's the trouble? Explain to me what's going on. Tell me why you feel this way, right? I know, yeah, I hear you. Help me understand, right? All of those sayings can really help someone feel like you are validating them and that you are there to really seek to understand what's going on and what their experience is and come up with ways to help. It is interesting, like when we get people sort of thinking in a problem-solving mindset, it can also help to de-escalate. So we're often very good at explaining, everything that's going on, everything that's terrible and how we've been wronged and when things are unjust. But when we ask someone the question like, well, how could we have done this differently so that you didn't have that experience? Or how would you like to approach us? How would you like us to approach this differently next time? And you get people thinking through that problem-solving lens, it can actually be effective de-escalation because it's a little bit distracting and it gets them thinking like, yeah, what would I have wanted differently? What could have been different? And it helps, again, it helps to solve those problems. Okay, I'm going to chime in here over in the chat. I know I asked this question. What could we say differently? Okay, when you stop yelling or talking over me, then we can talk. Okay, yeah. Or just say, it's easier for me to understand when we're having a calm conversation. Let me, oh, okay, let's talk a minute here. Yeah, absolutely. Let's have a chat. I hear you. I like that too. That's very validating. I hear you. I understand your frustration. Absolutely. Take a deep breath. Yeah, I mean, maybe people, again, we want to avoid telling people what to do. We want people to feel like they have control over the situation. So when we start giving them orders, and I know take a deep breath is helpful. I know when we get oxygen flowing to the brain, we make better decisions, we have a calmer response. I would say as a responder, take a deep breath. Excuse me, and we'll get into that. I don't know if I would tell other people to take a deep breath, right? Again, depending on the situation. Let's work through this together. I love that. You can also start taking slow, deep breaths to guide the other person. Absolutely. Like our energy is, what's the word I'm looking for? Give me a second. Contagious a little bit. I think that's what I'm trying. Yes, thank you, Sarah. You're reading my mind here. Yeah, your energy is kind of contagious. And I feel like I use this with my kids a lot too. When they're starting to get really agitated and things are stressful and they've got a lot going on and they're experiencing some sort of feelings of wrongdoing. If I have a very calm presence and I talk slower and I lower my tone of voice, right? We're going to get into some of those tips as well. But it helps to change the energy level in those situations, right? Like if you think about and you reflect, and maybe this is some of you, um, people in your life that are very effective de-escalators, like they have a calming presence. Think about what those individuals bring to those stressful situations, whether it is their body language, how they carry themselves, their eye contact, their facial expressions, their tone of voice, right? All of those things create this sort of calming presence that can help people de-escalate. Okay. So tying in psychological safety a little bit, and I mentioned that we were going to do this because it is really important when we think about, creating a work environment that's conducive to de-escalation and ensuring that employees are able to thrive and bring them their best selves sort of to the situation. We do need to create and be aware of psychological health and safety. Now, I'm going to have an unpopular opinion a little bit. I'm going to use this 175 people audience to hopefully make a bit of a difference here. When I think of psychological health and safety, I don't think of EAP programs. I don't think of workplace lunch and learns. I don't think of walking programs. I think of hazard identification and control. What I think is happening a little bit, and I think workplaces with really, really great intentions are saying, oh, yeah, we're psychologically safe because we have an EAP program, or we've increased our benefits for psychological supports, or we do lunch and learns on financial health and stress reduction, or we're doing resiliency workshops, and they think that that's psychological safety. What I can tell you is that while those things are good, right? And there's a place and a time, and those things can be very effective. But if you do a lunch and learn for employees on building resiliency, and then after lunch, someone goes and they're getting these last minute requests and have to work overtime, and nobody ever says thank you, and people take credit for their work, or they don't feel safe to speak up and say, hey, I'm not okay, then that lunch and learn wasn't really helpful, was it? Right? Like we need to identify what the root cause of those hazards are that can lead to mental harm and control those effectively. Right. So I like to think, because I'm a health and safety professional, I'm not a mental health professional. So when I look at this through the health and safety lens, that's what it's about. We want to create a safe workplace, whether it's for my physical health or my psychological health. We need to identify what our hazards are, what is harming people's mental health, and then we need to control those. So the definition of psychological safety, and this is from the CSA standard. So there's a CSA standard in Canada, CSA Z 1003 for psychological health and safety in the workplace. And it's essentially a state in which workers are free from exposure to reasonably foreseeable significant risks to their mental health arising from the acts and omissions of other people in the workplace, so that there's a low risk of mental injury. Like, read it 3 times, read that 5 times. The more I read it, the more I say it out loud, the more I love that definition, because it's not saying that work isn't going to be stressful. It's not saying that there aren't going to be hard and difficult times at work. It's saying that we are going to understand what are those foreseeable significant risks, and we're going to do something about it. That's what that's saying. We're going to try to move this culture over to the right-hand side where we're being truly careful to reduce that risk of mental harm and mental injury. I'll get off my soapbox now in a second, but really think about that. And there's lots of questions around, well, how do we identify our hazards? There's lots of ways, right? Yes, you can do surveys and assessments. You can talk to people. What you're not doing is asking people about their mental health. Just like for physical safety, when we're doing an inspection, right? Let's say it's a joint health and safety committee inspection. We're not going up to workers and saying, hey, how's your heart today? Or, do you have any lower back pain? We're actually not asking them about their physical health. We're asking them about, hey, are there hazards in this work environment that could cause you injury or cause you harm? That's what we're asking. And it is the same when it comes to psychological safety. We are not asking people how their mental health is. We are not asking them if they, are in distress or crisis. We're asking them situations and ways of working and how people are organized, and saying, what is it about this work environment that is contributing or could contribute to mental harm? That's what we want to know. Right? So sometimes it is how work is organized. Sometimes it's process based. Sometimes it's those last minute overtime demands or requests. Sometimes it's management not saying thank you, taking credit, not showing validation, appreciation, no recognition and reward, lack of clear expectations on what success even looks like. But there's, again, that's a whole other talk and I could go on forever. But certainly we have to be careful. We have to set people up for success. So making the connection here between workplace violence and harassment and psychological safety. If we have work environments that are contributing to mental harm, right, then we are not going to be able to effectively de-escalate. If we ourselves are sort of up here and one more sort of incident or trigger or, stressor away from being unable to cope ourselves, then certainly we're not going to be effective at helping other people de-escalate. Now, what this doesn't mean is that work is stress-free. There's stress in work. Of course, there's always going to be stressful situations at work. We're always going to have workplace stress. But what we want to create is this less threatening environment that allows people to respond to different situations instead of always reacting. There is a difference between reacting and responding. When we react to a situation, It means that our fight, flight, freeze response is kicking in and we are reacting because, you know, whether we don't have the capacity or we're already struggling to cope or we don't have good emotional regulation at the moment and we're reacting to something. When we respond, it implies that we are processing what's happening. We are formulating a response. We are considering the pros and cons of that response, and we are responding in a way, you know, that we're not going to be embarrassed by afterwards. So again, if we want to create situations and workplaces where employees are more effectively able to respond to these difficult situations, we need to stop normalizing toxic behaviors. I know that's a big statement there, but sometimes we have people in workplaces that, you know, get a pass. Maybe they've been there 25 years, or maybe we have this idea that they are so important to the organization that they don't need to be held accountable, or that we can let these pass and everybody else tiptoes around them and, you know, does their best not to poke the bear or upset that person so they're not on the receiving end. But we shouldn't normalize that. Right? That should not be okay. Those people should not get a pass. Other ways that psychologically unsafe workplaces increase the risk of workplace violence and harassment is this lack of trust and respect. If I didn't feel comfortable going to my supervisor or my manager and saying, you know what, like this happened to me, it made me feel unsafe, it made me fearful, I didn't know how to really deal with it or cope with it, or I didn't feel comfortable asking for help, that increases the risk, right? When there's power imbalance and abuse. So certainly if people are in a position of power or a perceived position of power, and they're using that to control, manipulate others, then that certainly is increasing the risk of violence and harassment. If there is a lack of job security or perceived lack of job security at your organization, it often creates this very competitive type of workplace culture where people try to take credit for other people's work, or they're always pointing and blaming others. You know, I sometimes refer to those individuals that have zero personal accountability as like Teflon. Like nothing sticks, everything's bouncing off, everything is always other people's issues and problems, things they didn't do, they didn't send the email, they didn't, and it's never, there's lack of personal accountability, right? That is unsafe. We need people to, first of all, feel safe saying, hey, I made a mistake, right? And own up and show that accountability, or I could have done this differently. That creates that safe work environment where people are okay taking personal accountability when they made a mistake or didn't do something. But when there's this lack of job security or people feeling threatened, then we deflect and we blame others, right? And it's very, very toxic. A lack of safe reporting mechanisms. People will not report incidents of workplace violence and harassment if it is not safe to do so. If they feel that they are going to be reprised against or judged, or that it's going to be career limiting, you know, there's always these, often, I'm not going to say always, but we start to implement these anonymous sort of complaint structures or mechanisms to report. If your organization feels that anonymous reporting is required because there's a lack of reporting, the problem isn't the employees not feeling safe. Why don't they feel safe? Why do they not feel like they can go to HR or to their manager or to their supervisor and they feel this need that they have to report anonymously? That is a problem, right? That's a lack of trust. So I'm going to talk just a little bit about this trauma-informed approach to workplace violence and harassment, because I think it's really easy for us to sit here and say, hey, when people respond poorly or when they come into our work environment and are hostile or they're aggressive, like there's something wrong with them. We need to understand that we all have different past life experiences. We've all been exposed to different things. Our fight, flight, freeze response works in different ways for all of us, and we're going to respond and react differently depending on those past life experiences. For some people, it is past traumas, right? Different things that have happened, especially when it comes to violence and harassment. So we react to perceived threats through a fight, flight, freeze response. And we can all think about this, and we all have this. Like, I don't know if I have a lot of time, but I'm going to just give an example that I often use is with roller coasters, right? Like if I pulled the room, and maybe I'll do it quick, but like, give me a thumbs up. Do the thumbs up if you love roller coasters. Like the higher, the faster, the stronger, the better. Yes, okay. The behemoth, all of the things. If you hate roller coasters and you're like, hard pass, you're not going to strap me to that little metal seat and fly me through the air. Give me the like surprised face. Yes. Okay. So as you can see, even in this room with 177 of us, there are a lot of people that love the roller coasters, right? Love going on them. That's an adrenaline rush, endorphins pumping. It's exciting. There's also a lot of us that are like hard pass, not doing it. That is a threat. That is scary. What I want everybody to remember about these roller coasters is the stressor is the same. The stressor is the roller coaster. It doesn't change. If we look at the behemoth at Canada's Wonderland, it's the same for all of us, but we respond to it in very different ways. Maybe based on past life experiences. Maybe we had a terrifying experience on a roller coaster once where we were sick to our stomach, or, it was just not what we expected. It made us feel awful and terrible. Maybe we grew up in a household where our parents said, oh my gosh, no, roller coasters are so dangerous. Don't ever go on those. That's the worst thing you can do, right? Whereas there's other people that have had lovely, fantastic, fun experiences on roller coasters. We don't judge people's love or dislike of roller coasters or their stress response to a roller coaster because we understand, right? We understand. I get like not wanting to be strapped in and flying through the air. I understand how some people's bodies and mind is going to perceive that as a threat, and their body is going to do things to say, hey, abort, don't do this. They might start getting their heart pounding, clammy palms, right? They might start getting butterflies or digestive tract type issues, maybe even a headache, right? Their body is saying, no, 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 don't do this. And when we have other threats or other stressors in our lives, we respond differently. And we shouldn't judge people based on their response to certain stressors just because it's not how we respond. A really good friend of mine, when I worked in healthcare, she grew up in a home with a lot of yelling. Parents yelled at each other, yelled at her, and her fight, flight, freeze response from when she was a child was when she was getting yelled at, she would go into her room and just shut down and be quiet and just sit there. And that was her response. Her body kind of just was like flight, right? Get out of the situation, remove yourself, and just be quiet. So when she entered the workforce, and she actually did WSIB claims management. So you can imagine not everybody's happy all the time, right? Claims get denied. It can be, not a great situation. So if she had someone yell at her, like an employee, or get upset, to raise their voice, her fight, flight, freeze response was to shut down. And she actually could not formulate a sentence, she could not continue that conversation. So it's really easy to say, oh my gosh, like, well, she can't do her job. Like, what's going on? Why? Of course you're going to get yelled at. That's the type of work that you do. But we had to work on it, right? We had to create a safe environment where we would sort of condition her and we'd be in a safe space. I would yell, and try to simulate some of those situations. She knew that she was safe to be able to improve on those skills and respond differently. Because again, from her past trauma, she responded in ways that weren't helpful, right, for her career, even when it wasn't a threatening situation. So I just want everybody to remember that maybe you have coworkers and colleagues, and this is sort of internal, that respond in ways that maybe seem disproportionate to the threat. Like maybe you may think this is not a big deal. So what? We got a last minute request or someone yelled or this happened, and that might not be a big deal to you at all. You may never think about it again after it happens. To other people, they take that home with them. They overthink it. They overanalyze it. They lose sleep over it. And just because that reaction is not what it was for you does not make it right or wrong. It makes it different. And sometimes we need to understand someone's reaction and why they're reacting in a certain way instead of judging them for that response. So a trauma-informed approach to workplace violence, it also involves, prevention, de-escalation, and different types of responses. I think we sometimes overuse trauma, right? Like it actually is defined as a deeply distressing or disturbing experience or event that can overwhelm an individual's ability to cope, and it can result in lasting impacts on their mental, emotional, and sometimes physical well-being. So trauma is real. And just because, again, you may have experienced a similar situation and did not experience trauma from it or a trauma response, does not mean that someone else didn't. Okay. What we're not saying here is that if people have disproportionate responses that are maybe, unhealthy in the work environment or inappropriate, we're not saying that people get a pass for bad behaviors because they have past trauma and how they're coping, might not be effective. But we do need to seek to understand and seek to support. Okay. So we need to build trust, sometimes understand what some of these triggers are. So a trigger is something that can, increase the likelihood that someone is re-traumatized by that event or that behavior or that interaction. And again, I sometimes think we overuse the term trigger. A trigger is not something that's just unpleasant or annoying, right? Like it actually is something that is going to increase that likelihood of re-traumatization. So just like with physical injuries, right, we may have situations that increase the risk of re-injury. We might have psychological triggers as well, right? Things that happen that may increase the likelihood of re-injury. In the resources that we're going to provide to you, there's a really great workshop that's called the Psychologically Safe Interactions Workshop. It's through Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. It's free. And essentially what it does is it allows groups of people that work together or interact closely together to go through and kind of say, hey, like what is psychologically safe for us? How are we going to communicate? How are we going to resolve conflict? How are we going to, respond when someone might be upset? And it allows sort of those groups to really figure out how to work safely together. And we'll send you a link to that. Be aware of our own attitudes and biases and don't judge. It's so easy to start getting judgmental about people and how they respond to difficult situations. Even through COVID, right? Like some people were very concerned and wouldn't go anywhere without a mask, using their hand sanitizer, very strict on distancing. And then as we started coming out of COVID, some people were quite comfortable to, go and interact socially and do those things, whereas other people were still fearful. Maybe they had underlying medical conditions or friends or family that they deeply cared about did. And it's not a competition, right? Like it doesn't make you morally superior because you're coping with something differently and it's not having as much of an impact on you, right? Just remember that. Like we're all going through stuff. So a couple other things to focus on, and I would say, this doesn't just involve people that have past trauma when we're trying to de-escalate individuals with a past trauma, but always try to create that sense of safety. I know when I worked in healthcare, if we had a patient or a family member that was visiting that was starting to become agitated, it takes some understanding to realize that we don't always express our true emotions. Sometimes when people are presenting as angry, it can be because they're scared or they're fearful, they're worried, right? So kind of getting to the understanding the root cause of that emotion can be helpful. And giving people a sense of confidence in our skills and abilities can be helpful as well, right? Like when people feel like they're not, either receiving good service or the person that they're dealing with doesn't know what they're doing or doesn't have the authority to make the decisions that we need them to make, that can cause frustration. So again, making sure that we're approaching it, that we're confident in our skills and abilities, not trying to dominate the situation, not invading someone's personal space. I talked about this strategy, low and slow. I love it. So opposite to how I've been presenting this session today, which I feel like is loud and animated and fast. I'm a fast talker. But if I was trying to de-escalate, I'd have to completely change how I'm presenting myself. I would want to talk lower. I'd want to lower my tone of voice and slow my speech down, allow people to process what I'm saying without it feeling threatening or rushed. We talked about that a little bit earlier. So again, that low and slow, say it over in your mind, like low and slow, giving people a sense of control and offering choices. I think sometimes people get agitated when they feel like things are happening to them and they have no control over the situation. We like to have control over our lives. We like to make decisions around what our day is going to look like, how things are going to go. We're generally not good at waiting. We're impatient. So when we give people choices, it helps them to regain a sense of control. Again, it might be small choices. It might be like, oh, well, would you like to wait over here? Or would you like to wait in that other room where there's a TV? Would you like the Wi-Fi password? Would you like, I'm just trying to think of, because waiting can be a bit of an issue for some individuals, but giving them choices. Would you like me to follow up with you via email or a phone call? Right? Would you like to come back later or do you want to stay and wait? When we can start thinking about those very small choices that might seem insignificant to us, but it can give people a sense of control back over maybe a powerless situation. Regulating over educating. Again, say this over and over in your head. Regulating means that we're seeking to understand. We're trying to understand how we can de-escalate, what people need, what they're experiencing, and why they're experiencing it in that way, instead of educating by saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. This is our policy. This, you know what I mean? And yes, of course, those things are important, but in the spirit of de-escalation and keeping people safe, educating might not be the best option in that moment. This flip your lid. Love this analogy by Dr. Dan Siegel. And I think I linked, I don't know if everybody can click on that link. Do it later so I don't lose you. We'll provide that link as well because I have to give full credit to Dr. Dan Siegel here. But essentially what Dr. Dan Siegel is talking about is our brains, right? We have our sort of primitive brain. Okay, thanks, Sarah. We have sort of our primitive brain down here, right? Which is, big feelings, anger, frustration, all of those things. And then we have our prefrontal cortex that kind of covers that. And this is our emotional regulation. This is helping us make decisions, pros, cons about when we say things and how we say things. And it allows us to sort of manage some of these big feelings. But what can happen when we have sort of stressor, and things are happening and putting all of this pressure, we flip our lid, right? And now we don't have all of these sort of conditioning. Our prefrontal cortex is disengaged and we're left with sort of these big feeling responses like anger, frustration, and fear, anxiety, right? Because this has been disengaged. When we're trying to de-escalate someone that's in this state and they've flipped their lid and they are not processing and making decisions, it's fight, flight, freeze response, all of those things, we need to start re-engaging that prefrontal cortex. And we can do that through distraction, right? We can do that through thinking about other things. If this is you, okay, let's just say this is not, we're trying to sort of de-escalate ourselves and bring back some emotional awareness and things like that. What you can do is actually distract yourself, start counting backwards from 100. Think about your teachers' names. If you find yourself in a very stressful situation where maybe you feel like you're losing control of your emotions and you're going to react or respond in a way that you're not proud of after, if you start to distract yourself by, some of those, counting backwards, going through the days of the week, thinking of past teachers, things like that, then you can start to re-engage that prefrontal cortex. Now, if we're doing this for other people, if we're trying to de-escalate someone that has flipped their lid, right, we can offer distractions, get them to talk about something else. Maybe they've got a dog with them, ask them about their dog, right? Ask them about pets. Pets are a great way to get people thinking. It's harmless, right, about other things. Get them to focus on something different, maybe other experiences, okay? Okay. So again, thank you for the link there, Dee Dee, on flipping your lid. It's a really helpful sort of video to help understand sort of the physiological response and what's going on when people are in that fight, flight, freeze response and not making sort of rational decisions and choices. So post-response, we need to understand that if there has been an incident, whether it's workplace violence, yelling, people can leave absolutely shaken. And don't assume that because something didn't negatively impact you, that it's not going to negatively impact others. There is going to be, that psychological, emotional impact. people can be left feeling, embarrassed, especially if they acted in ways like, okay, I'm saying this like it happens to other people, but it doesn't. We all have moments where we react instead of respond. I'll give you a potentially embarrassing example for myself. Okay, so you know how at McDonald's, this is awful. Okay, at McDonald's, you know how there's like 2 lanes and you order and then you are supposed to like, zipper in and merge, right, to get to the windows? I was having a bad day, right? Just a terrible day. I think I was rushing. I hate being late. It's like a huge pet peeve of mine, but I absolutely needed to get like a coffee or whatever in the drive-through. And right before I was about to pull up, the person on the other side like cut me off and it was my turn. Oh my gosh. I did not respond. I reacted. I laid on the horn and it was like I was like another person, honestly. And I was getting so frustrated, maybe some gestures that I can't do on camera right now. But you know what I mean? Like I reacted out of just pure frustration and feeling like I had been wronged and what a personal insult that they cut me off and all of those things. Okay. Like 2 minutes later, I was so embarrassed. And it's even embarrassing for me to like share this and tell you, but we need to normalize it. Like this happens. Like who was I? It's like I was a different person. I completely lost my emotional regulation and control in that moment and felt like just it was such an injustice that this person had done this and is so not like it is so not a big deal. Don't be that person. Like I won't do that again. But sometimes we just have days, right? We almost refer to it as like, stress stacking or stacking of various stressors. Like imagine you start your day and you wake up to your dog throwing up on the bed. Okay, again, maybe a little graphic, but that has happened to me too. So that's an immediate, like, terrible start to your day. And then you go to start your car and your car doesn't start. Or your kids are like having a bit of a tantrum because they can't find a pair of matching socks or something. I don't know. And like your day just keeps going. And then you get to work and there's like this last minute request that you need to jump in and do. Or, you've got to report something that's due that you didn't anticipate. And just your day is going like this. And normally any one of those things we can cope with. Right? We can deal with it, not a big deal. But when they are happening, you don't have time to sort of recover and it's just constant, right? And it's overwhelming, then we may react, right? And it might not be that particular person cutting me off at McDonald's because it certainly was not that big of a deal. But because of all the other things that were maybe consuming my mind and my thoughts and my energy, that was sort of the last straw. And unfortunately, they were on the receiving end of my very bad day. So offer meaningful supports. I cannot stress this enough. I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about what is psychological safety. And often when I go to different customers or employers, I'll be like, tell me what you've got for your, psychological health and safety program. Number one answer is always EFAP. Now, I am not here to say that EFAP is not a good thing because an EFAP stands for Employee Family Assistance Program. For some, it's just EAP, Employee Assistance Program. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think it's a fantastic support, but it cannot be your only support. There are people that will never reach out to EAP. Often because they don't trust that it's private and confidential because it's employer funded. Sometimes they've used it in the past and didn't have a good outcome. It's frustrating sometimes to actually get the referral and talk to someone or get what you need. It can be very difficult. So when I say meaningful supports, to offer meaningful supports, you have to know what people need and want. And sometimes that is having some community-based resources. For some, that's a peer support program. For some, that's an employee assistance program. For some, that's psychological support through your benefit provider where they can choose who they would like to see and things like that. Just don't assume that you know what people want or need. You have to ask them, right? Review and learn, right? Maybe a situation did go sideways. Let's reflect. Let's create a safe debrief where we can talk about what happened in a no blame culture, right? Because we all do our very best in stressful situations, but sometimes it didn't go well, right? Don't blame people for how they responded if we didn't train them and give them the tools and help them and coach them on how to respond differently. Normalize help-seeking behavior, right? If there is a psychologically safe work environment where it is okay to say, hey, I need help, I'm not myself today, I have a question, right? If we create an environment where it is okay to do that, to ask questions, ask for help, not pretend to have all the answers all of the time, but even, understand what our flaws are and how we can do differently, then it's going to help keep people safe. Okay. All right. So there's a couple more slides here and then I will open it up to any questions that you may have. But please go to wsps.ca. We have tons of free resources available. If you need help, if you need some consulting, there's ways to get in touch. We have lots of training options, different courses related to psychological safety and workplace violence and harassment. And we certainly are able to help provide customers with WSIB health and safety program, joining that program, and we have a whole team that helps people be successful. And that, if you're not aware, the WSIB Health and Safety Excellence Program is a way to help with some WSIB premiums and the possibility of getting rebates if you do certain things in that excellence program. So I'm not going to get all into it, but if you've never heard of that before, certainly worth taking a look at. Here's some additional tools and resources. You don't need to click on all of these right now. They will be provided to you in an email probably tomorrow. I don't want to speak for Emily, but following the session, we will email these resources out to all participants. But again, some of the tools that we have related to workplace violence and harassment and psychological health and safety, there is a link here, Managing Trauma at Work from Workplace Strategies for Mental Health. That's really great. And then, of course, Dr. Dan Siegel's work and the Canadian Mental Health Association. Okay, so I am going to just open it up for questions now. And maybe I should, oh yes, so Emily's saying you can expect the email this afternoon. And Jacques, yes, the presentation will be available to participants. I don't know that it's going to be emailed out, so it will be available likely in a few weeks, so not tomorrow, but in a few weeks on wsps.ca. If you go to training and events, I know Dee Dee, you posted the link earlier, maybe you could, or Emily did, someone can pop that back in so everyone knows sort of where to go or where to get information on upcoming safety connections or past safety connections that you might want to take a look at. Okay, I did a lot of talking. Now, if anybody has any questions, I'm going to stick around. We've got 13 minutes. I know Dee Dee also put my email address in the chat earlier, so certainly if you have any questions that maybe you don't feel comfortable asking in front of the group or you're looking for something specific, feel free to reach out to me. Is this the same? Yes, Lead, this is the same. We are running it twice. So it is also being available, I think towards the end of October, we have a second date. But yes, it will be the same presentation. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Jackie. Yeah, so again, if that's it, if you don't have any questions, then thank you so very much for coming to our Safety Connection. I hope everyone has a safe day.